It was just a nightmare, a nightmare.
It's nearly impossible that there is any one of us who doesn't know one.
Unfortunately, Bexar County has one of the highest domestic violence rates in Texas. That's why one local group is trying to sign people up for their event that they hope will put an end to domestic violence. Eyewitness News reporter Erica Zucco shares how one family's story has touched hundreds of hearts and how you can also help raise awareness of the growing problem in our community.
Christine Meza was surrounded by friends and just starting nursing school.
Her life was taking off
when her 2-year relationship took a turn. Her mom says her boyfriend at the time began controlling her, verbally abusing her, and eventually getting physical.
It escalated to the point where he, brutalized her. She left, and she never went back. But that was when all the stalking, started.
It ended when he took her life, and then his own. A tragedy her family knows they're not alone in facing.
I know there's a million other Christines out there.
They turned their grief to grit, determined to stop domestic violence. They now organize the Purple Run alongside the Battered Women and Children's Shelter. It's a walk and run with food trucks, games, and more.
It's just a festival of good things and hope and to instill dignity in everybody.
To build community and spread awareness, sharing messages of support with victims and a warning to abusers.
The law will catch up with you.
Early registration lasts through September 30th, with the walk on October 6th. To sign up or find help, visit KENS5.com. Erica Zucco, KENS 5 Eyewitness News.